Alright, so here is the bush for the top of the film advance. There's this little pinion set on the top, common shaft. I've just forced some synthetic grease in there by the simple method of applying a great blob and then pressing on it, and then the hydraulic pressure does the rest for you. A bit like packing bearings, packing wheel bearings for your car, for those of you who can remember doing that. Okay, so now I'm just rotating the take up the spool with my thumb so that the gear here engages with the clutch and it all drops down into place. There's a single screw over in this position. That's the position. There would be a shoulder screw to support the cocking rack on a Retina 3C camera. Of course, there's no cocking rack here that to be needed. Alright, so we want that little bush and that little pawl in next. Now the bush, plain side up. If you put it countersink side up, it's not going to go well. I'll just run some synthetic grease through the hole in the pawl, and the pawl sits in there like that. This shoulder screw has a groove around the top edge where the spring fits. We'll get it in place first, then I'll fit the spring. Run that down. If you've done it right, the screw will be tight, but that pawl will move freely. That looks good. Here is the spring for that pawl. And sometimes it's a bit easier to manipulate with the tip of the tweezers or another screwdriver. In this case I'm using a toothpick to manipulate this over that screw head so that this is now sprung loaded. It's only weakly sprung loaded, it doesn't need to click out there strongly. It's just to keep it biased towards the gear, which we're just about to put in. So I'll take some synthetic grease again. I just want to wipe some on the inside edge, and that'll distribute itself fairly promptly, and some through the centre. Drop that over the top, and if I rotate that anti-clockwise, it should push that pawl out of the way and drop into position like that. And you can probably see the action of that pawl. It only allows that motion in one direction. Alright, just rotate this around until I've got that running forward and backwards. Check that everything's still sitting in the neutral position here. It's all looking good. This spring, I always give that a wipe of synthetic grease, not because it needs to be lubricated to work, but just to keep any corrosion and so forth at bay. Right, this should be sitting so that the wings either side are upwards. This plate goes on there. This plate goes on the centre. And then there's the washer. Now, I'm going to cheat here because it's much more convenient to put a little gear on the top here that I've borrowed from a Retina 3C than try and fit the arm at this point. The arm would normally go on there in that position and the screw on the top, but you'll see that this works far more conveniently for those of you who have got a Retina 3C type camera that you can purloin parts from. You just want one of the gears from the top of the film advance shaft. It doesn't matter if it's got broken teeth or whatever, because we're not using them. We're just using this to hold things together. So I'll put a screw in and run that down. That'll be coming out again fairly shortly. I just want to hold everything together. Yeah, it doesn't need to be tightened right up. Okay, so we've got our film advance shaft in place. Now at the base here I want to put the lock lever in for that rewind button. So we'll do that next. Is that focusing? Yeah, it sort of is. Go around in a direction you can see stuff. Okay. So here's our lock lever. And I'm just going to lubricate that. I'm having a look at this first. I'm just checking that it's dead flat, because this camera had certainly suffered in the wars a bit. Now normally I would just lubricate the tip of that with some molybdenum paste, but given that there's a little bit of corrosion on that part, which we've now sort of cleaned away, I'm just going to rub that lightly with some synthetic grease all over to keep moisture and oxygen away, and hopefully avoiding further corrosion problems. Now here's the molybdenum paste I'd normally use. Normally I'll just put some on that rounded tip, and usually I'll just give it a wipe through the centre for good measure. And this thing sits in there like that. Its return spring goes in there. Now one leg of the return spring is up against the casting at this point. The other end is sort of floating in space over here. The shoulder screw goes through that. The shoulder screw has got two shoulders, one for the spring and one for the lever. Check that the lever is free to move, that you haven't trapped it underneath the shoulder of the screw, and tighten the screw. Check again. That moves freely, that's all good. Now I've got to pick up this leg of the spring, lift it over and drop it in place behind the lever, so now that this is sprung loaded. And we can put the sprocket shaft in place. Put the sprocket into the camera body, the slot side goes up. Here's the sprocket shaft. I've put a little bit of synthetic grease on that, here and here, a touch on the gear at the top. This should drop down through that sprocket, just like that. At the base I'll just use the tip of my tweezers to help guide that shaft into position, and you can probably see it's coming up against this lever, which I'll pull back out of the way. The sprocket is engaged here at the top with those teeth. Now I'm just going to rotate the take-up spool until I see the hole come around in the sprocket shaft, in the gap there, in that notch, and then I can take the screw that goes in there and fit it in place. Sometimes that screw doesn't go in easily. If that's the case, revolve your shaft 180 degrees. Sometimes the hole is better countersunk on one side of the shaft than the other, and it's easier to get the screw started. Okay, so that's in place. Now, just make sure everything's sitting here as it should do. we want our rewind button on there next. So our rewind button, we've got three pieces. We've got the button, the return spring, and the washer. Can you even see any of those? No. There you can see them. I'm going to put some synthetic grease through that spring. I'm being a bit more generous with the grease than I'd normally be for these parts because of the corrosion that we've had. Put the spring on there, put the washer on there. This screws onto the end of the take-up the sprocket shaft. And the button needs to be able to pass through the washer. So if you do it up and the button will not depress, that means that it's sitting on the shoulder of the screw and you'll need to sort that out. Okay, so that's that. I'll just get my pliers and tighten that thing up if I can find the right ones. These ones. And you just need to tighten that up until your thumb hurts basically while you're holding that shaft. And that is our take-up spool and sprocket shaft all in place. I can check these two screws are tight. Everything's looking very good. Right, well that stuff's all back in place. I'll put the baffle in next. You can see it's got two notches. Drops into the body like that. The notch down at the bottom is just clearance to where that screw comes through at the bottom there. Okay, and then the front of the camera needs to go in, and to do that I want to apply some grease to this piece so we don't end up losing it and so it's properly lubricated. So I'll just get some synthetic grease. Coat all sides of that piece, and that's going to sit on that shelf right there. We'll drop it into that little notch there. That's tucked down out of the way and that'll slide into the camera body without a fight, probably. Like that. I'll pull that arm forward, lift it up and pull it forward so that it's more or less in position. Now we've got 4 screws that hold this in place. One of them is a round-headed screw, quite flat for a round-headed screw, but it's that style. Sits in that position. That's where the screw that holds the bracket to keep the transfer shaft in place on a Retina 3C camera would sit. That screw didn't go in very smoothly there. It's running in the thread okay, but it just doesn't feel quite right. And there are 2 screws at the base. And if you've had the camera completely apart, these screws will be the ones that are dirty from the adhesive and leatherette that's been on there previously and frequently a bit corroded. Okay, let's get the 4 screws tightened up. Okay, that part's done. I think we'll put this piece in place next. Now what do we need for this? Well, first I want to tension the film advance, and let's get this up on a block of wood and I'll get you focused. I need to wind a full wind of tension onto that take-up spool because at the moment there's no tension on there at all. And I'm going to hold that tension there by fitting one of the longer screws from the film advance lever in the third position here, which we didn't use previously. So what am I wanting to do? Well, I've got a pair of stiff tweezers here. I'm going to hold back the release lever, rotate this one full turn, drop the release lever back in place and put that long screw in there. That's the hole I'd left empty, and just run it in lightly. That's just to stop this from being able to back up while I fit the piece across the top. Okay, so we've got this in the neutral position. That's where it starts. We've got a full turn of tension on there. See if I can get this down at a comfortable working height, that you can see what's happening. That looks okay. Right. So basically all we need to do now is fit this piece in place and all will be wonderful. So we'll take the screw back out of the film advance here. Put the washer in position. Take this lever, drop it into that slot, rotate it into position, and this arm should be in a straight line. The uprights are out here at the end of the body. Now put my finger underneath the film advance so that nothing is dropping away. That's all lined up with the square on the top of the film advance shaft. I run that screw down. Ooh, magnetic screwdriver, my favourite thing. You think this looks awkward? Well, we only need 3 hands to do this. But if we hadn't put that screw in the bottom, you'd be needing 4 or 5 hands and it'd be much worse. Now that screw's not going to behave. If I can get it started. Screw just doesn't want to start. Now we're away. Okay. Run that screw down. Check that everything's seated. It appears to be. Tighten the screw up. Okay, well now we've got a film advance that can't unwind itself completely, or easily at least. We can take that long screw out that we no longer need in there. We can control this with the tab at the top. Let's bring that back round to the rest position. Put the short screw in there that should have been there to start off with. That can't back up any more than that, so we can come back and rescue that position. It's quite good. Okay, I'm going to put the chrome trim on the base plate now, because now's a very good time to be doing it. I've got multiple bins here, so I have to be careful which one I'm fishing pieces out of, otherwise I'll be in trouble. So this piece drops on there like that. We have 7, I think, small nickel plated screws that hold this in place. This was a bit pulled out of shape from me having to fight with the advanced lever, but I think I've got it pushed back into position. And my goal here is to get this on and get the film advance lever in position so that I don't lose my tension on the film advance shaft. It can't go far anyway because I've got that lever in at the top, but I still don't need it unwinding any more than I need to. Right, so we've got our lever. We've got 1, 2, 3 screws. One of the original screws I can reuse. It's in a reasonable state. Its other 2 were very ugly. I'll show you those in a second. Okay, so basically I want this in its rest position. It wasn't there. It's with this tab pointing straight out. So if I rotate my release lever, that's sitting there at the moment. It's sort of armed and dangerous, but it's sitting there. I can put my film advance lever in position, drop one of the screws in, run that in, the holes in the bottom of the film advance seem to be fine once the screw had come out. Okay, so now I can just check my film advance, press the release lever down. You can see the film advance moves smoothly, returns smoothly, no extra funny actions or anything, everything working nicely. Okay, I'll find the screws, the other 3 screws for here. I think I actually need to take replacements because the originals that came out of the base plate were very bad. Let me just find 3 replacements. That film advance here, they were a bit ugly, so we want that one. And these are screws that I'm taking from that parts camera that I'd stripped down just to show you how things are supposed to come apart without a fight. I think I can get my tripod socket in still. We'll find out in a second. Let's get those screws done up. That little bush goes in. Our tripod socket goes in. Yes, that fits in easily. There's 3 screws for the tripod socket. One of the good reasons to put the tripod socket in nice and early is that otherwise every time you drop your camera back on the bench, you press the back release button and the back swings open. It can get very annoying. Okay, 3 screws in, tighten them up. We're done with the base of the camera for the moment. Everything's working nicely, so we can deal with tidying up the top of the camera, the rewind shaft, the chrome trim and strap lugs. Okay, let's put the chrome trim on the top. At this end, got our strap lug, countersunk or flathead screwing at that end. What's that screw doing in there? That's one we were looking for before and we couldn't find. That screw can go in there, panhead screw. The strap lug goes on the end here. I usually find if you press the strap lug towards the end of the body as far as it goes, up against the heads of the screws and tighten them up, that's the right position. Right, the rewind shaft. Now I'm just going to apply some synthetic grease to the inside of this. This shaft is a little bit scarred or worn, so it tells me that that shaft had previously been running very dry or had lots of sand and rubbish in it. Yeah, that'll go on there like that. That'll drop into place. And there are two screws hold that in position. And if you get to this point and the screw that you're putting in there is an ugly one with glue and rust on it, swap it with one from the base of the camera because that's probably where it came from. By luck or design I seem to have clean screws at the top, so that's good. Okay, starting to look more and more like a camera every minute. What do we want here? We've got our front plate of course to go on, and before that goes on we need the cocking shaft and the shutter release. So a little bit of synthetic grease on the pin of the shutter release there. Don't need as much as that. That drops in there like that. The arm sticking out the side sticks out this way. The cocking thing here can go on. Now getting this in position, drops in here, we want the D on that, the flat part of the letter D to be either horizontal or slightly clockwise of that position. See if I can get that seated. Why am I not finding the hole? That's what I wanted to do. And there the letter D, the top of the letter D is running at this angle, which is not quite where I want it to be. So I'm one tooth out, I think. That's better. Okay, so the flat of the letter D is on this plane now, not right the way around there. That's all good. I'm going to put a little touch of synthetic grease on the tips of those things where they're going to run in the casting. And here is the front casting, the front plate. Just make sure those are guided into position. And with two screws that will hold that in place. Now that screw I can see is a little bit mutilated looking. Almost certainly that once held the one of the two screws from the top plate, and this one here is a little bit dirty, so I know that that probably originally came from the base of the camera. But that doesn't matter, it's all going to be hidden in here. It'll work just as well for our purposes. Okay, so now it really is looking like a camera. Let's start work on cleaning up this top cover. I'm going to remove the shoe so I can more easily clean up components there. Makes it easier to get rid of all that filth. The counter I'll remove. Okay, take note of where everything goes. Screw. There's the lever that operates the counter. We lift this off. We see we've got a wavy washer underneath that. We've got the counter disc here. Unlike the later cameras, this is actually metal. And there's the disc. All these pieces just need to be cleaned. They're not dirty at all, really. The viewfinder, you can clean that glass in place. It's not impossible to get at that. It can be a bit annoying trying to get the smears off it because finger grease and so forth will have sneaked around the edges of the glass, and no matter how much you clean them without dismantling it, it always seeps back out and makes a mess. So there's the glass from the front. This, don't take this apart, that does not screw in, that's crimped in. If you start twisting that, you'll wish you hadn't. Alright, so this I want to clean up with some naphtha. Mostly this is just dust and dirt, nothing too dramatic. The marks here are pretty much inevitable. That's where the rewind knob has been rubbing on it. There's not much to do in here, to tell the truth. There's not much you need to do. That looks fine. I'll clean that shoe. You can take that shoe off and clean it with the other components when you're doing if you're putting things through an ultrasonic cleaner, that's a good thing to do. It'll get out all the embedded dirt and dust. But you can do a pretty good job cleaning it by hand. Alright, I'll put that shoe back on. Be careful with these screws. If you damage them, it'll be very obvious. Counter components, I'll just give them a quick wipe. Okay, that looks fine. Now, put this together. Start here. This goes to the front of the camera. Yeah. I'll just put a little wipe of synthetic grease on the back of this, just to help it stay in place on that disc. put a wipe of synthetic grease through the centre, put that in position on there. The wavy washer, I'll give that a wipe of synthetic grease, put that on there. Okay, now the frame with the numbers on it, we're going to have that to the front. Just line that up like that. We'll give this a wipe. On the underside, that drops in there like that, back against that post there really, and get the screw in place. Getting that to centre up, it's normally not too difficult. That just fell into place. And hold this with your finger, check that this dial moves easily in the direction of the arrow. If you roll this round the other way, this tab will get trapped under there and nothing will want to move. So that's fine. Just leaves us cleaning the glass and putting this back in place. Okay, so what I find is that cleaning a piece of glass like that, a cotton handkerchief is just the job.